Welcome to Goldfish on Games. The home micro scene was so full of mostly incompatible and competing systems that it was very easy to completely skip over an entire line of computers without even realising it. That happened to me when it came to the Atari 8-bit line. I had no idea it existed until various YouTubers brought the machine to my attention, and since then I've been looking to get my hands on one. So I picked up this machine, the Atari 600XL, the little brother to the 800XL, which I plan to clean up and restore the best I can while I check out its hardware and some of its games. And first things first, let's try booting it to see if it even works. For connecting to a TV, here's RF and a custom monitor connector. So for now, let's try connecting via RF and see if it works. And it boots! But the image isn't particularly stable. And the audio is really quiet. Like, I really have to bump the volume up quite loud to even hear anything. But it boots games from the cart slot, so, to be honest, this is a pretty good starting state. Due to the picture quality, I decided to make a monitor cable first. And after looking at a pinout, I found out the machine had composite video, as well as mono audio. So it wasn't particularly difficult to take a 5-pin DIN connector and a set of composite cables and wire something up. And as we can see, the picture is much clearer and far more stable, but it's still very quiet in the audio department. So let's get this thing opened up and get the motherboard out. A few screws later and the case is ready to come off, but we've got to be careful of the ribbon cable. We don't want to rip that. With that off comes the top of the machine. But we still have a few more screws if we want to get the motherboard out. Annoyingly, to take the RF shield apart we have to undo some bolts. Normally it's just these metal tabs that we can see along the top. And with a few metal tabs taken care of, the top of the shield will come off. And there we go, the motherboard. Now let's take a closer look at its specs, shall we? To start off with, we have the Sally, which is a 6502 processor running at 1.8 MHz. Graphics are handled by two chips, the ANTIC, the alphanumeric television interface controller, which provided support for drawing characters and for treating the screen as a bitmap, which was known as a playfield. It also had the GTA, which stood for Graphics Television Interface Adapter, which could apply colour to the playfield from the ANTIC and then draw sprites on top of it. Between the two they had a number of graphics modes, but these typically had a system palette of 256 colours and could draw anywhere from 2 to 6 colours on screen at once, and had support for 4 sprites on top of the playfield. Audio is handled by Pokey. This had 4 channels and could produce a wide range of sounds. It also handled a number of other functions such as reading the keyboard or paddle controllers. The 600XL came with just 16K of RAM, where the 800XL had a full 64KB. It could be upgraded via a RAM pack, which could be connected to the parallel port found on the back. Next to the parallel interface you can find a general I/O port, which can be used to connect floppy drives and cassette decks. Along the side of the machine we can find 2 joystick ports, which, unsurprisingly, are Atari standard. It also has BASIC built in, which would auto boot on launch unless you held down the options key. This was needed as some games wouldn't run if BASIC was taking up some of the RAM. And in the middle of the machine we have a single cartridge slot, which is different to previous models as they needed a second one to load BASIC from. Now the motherboard I've got here is actually quite dirty and dusty, so let's give it a quick clean down to make it easy to spot any obvious issues that might result in quiet audio. And with a chunk of the dirt gone, it's clear to see that something was spilt on this machine at some point, but nothing really jumps out at me as broken. So let's leave this aside for now and take a look at cleaning up the case. Upon looking at the bottom of the case we can clearly see more evidence that something had leaked inside this machine. though thankfully it proved absolutely no match for the green hand and a bit of glass cleaner. Now I have to admit, I'm hoping that this leak happened while it was in storage, rather than while it was running. And it wasn't long before the case was starting to look pretty damn clean, though the label at the bottom was always going to be a bit stained. The case itself might also be slightly discoloured, but I'm not really one for retro brighting. I'm happy to have a machine discoloured as long as it's clean. And cleaning this part of the case doesn't take long with a bit of elbow grease and some glass cleaner. The green hand is great for getting into the various vents, and the other side is good for giving it a good rub down. So we might as well move on to the top, and the first thing we've got to do is remove the keyboard, and take a look at cleaning the keys. Following the advice of many other restorers, I take a picture of the keycaps before I start taking them off. That way I know where everyone goes when it comes time to put it back together. This is probably the most important step you can take. But removing the keycaps is a slow process. But thankfully the keys pull off reasonably easy and have a plastic holder between the keycap and the keyboard membrane, so I don't have to worry about losing any springs. Well, apart from this one that decided to be quite badly wedged into the keycap and really did take some effort to get it back into place. And with them all off, it's time to use the trusty green hand and some glass cleaner to wipe each one in turn. It took at least half an hour. But they were all done, and it was time to give the keyboard unit itself a quick clean down. So out with the brushes, and it didn't take long to get most of the dirt and grime out the way. So all that was left now was to put each key back into place. And with that done, I have to admit it's looking much nicer. Which means the next step has to be to the top of the case, which got the same treatment as the rest, lots and lots of scrubbing. Unfortunately, many of the metal looking parts were scratched, so I really couldn't do much with them, but I still could give them a nice scrub down so they looked a little bit better. When I need to scrub down parts that I don't want to be scratched, I tend to use the scrubbers that are designed for glassware. These tend to be much kinder on the hardware than the regular ones and tend to give a much nicer finish. When I got this machine, it actually came with a cassette deck, but no cassettes. So I had to buy a few games so I had something to test on it. And in a move that didn't really surprise me, the deck could barely move any of the tapes. Thankfully, I guess this was most likely going to be an issue and had a replacement band on order. And with a few quick screws and a bit of grunt, the case opened up and we see this belt is very loose. And the timer belt had come off completely. Replacing the belt was a little tricky due to how we had to unscrew this connector, as I had to move this metal part to get the old belt off and get the new one on. And while I struggle to try and get this belt put on, if you look on the board on the right hand side you can see two interesting things. One is the two I/O ports, which allows the machine to daisy chain multiple drives together, and the second is the push rod that actually turns the tape drive on when the machine wants it to actually run, as just pressing the play button will not start the drive. The computer itself has to indicate that it's ready to take data. And after giving a very quick test by pushing the wheels around, it's time to put the two parts together at least enough that I can give it a quick test. So let's give this a quick go, and yep, that's looking much better. So let's give the outside a quick clean and get it all screwed up back together again. Oh, and a quick aside, this drive also didn't come with a power pack, but I figured I could use one of the many DC power packs I had to hand. But I was wrong, this machine actually required a 9V AC power pack. Thankfully, it turned out not to be too difficult to find one online. Oh, and I had to give the I/O cable a quick clean down as well. You've got to get these things clean because amazingly they're probably one of the dirtiest parts of any machine. So with the rest of the machine coming together quite nicely, it was time to take another look at this audio issue. And after doing a quick trace down through the audio pin on the monitor connector, I could see it go down the board and it passed through a couple of caps, both of which looked visually okay, and it was round about this area that it split off to go into the RF module as well, which meant it was probably something before then that was the issue. And immediately before this was a chip. And after checking the number online, it turned out to be an amplifier, which sounded like an ideal candidate to be the issue. So I ordered a new one online and it didn't take long to arrive, and was very easy to replace. So it was time to turn the machine on again, and instantly my ears were assaulted by a very high-pitched sound, which gave me great confidence that I'd actually fixed the problem, and after turning the volume down I then confirmed it by booting up Donkey Kong. Ah, sweet sweet sound at decent volumes. So really all that's left now is to put the machine back together again. The shield base goes in first with the Mobo slotting in on top of that. And finally the top part of the shield goes on top of that. Now I'm not going to bother with the bolts, it seems entirely pointless, the screws are more than enough to hold it all together. And after screwing the keyboard back into the top of the case, and then wiring it back onto the motherboard, it was time to screw the whole thing back together again. And with just 4 screws separating me from a fully working machine, I had to quickly get it done so I could give it a proper test out. And I have to admit, it's looking pretty damn nice. I'm really happy with how the keys turned out, as I have to admit I'm not a big fan of taking them apart to clean them. So what are the plans for this lovely clean machine? Well, isn't it obvious? I've got to play some games. And I have a couple of kart games that came with it to try out. Now I have to admit, this is a pretty decent version of Donkey Kong. It looks pretty colourful, it plays quite nicely, and it's always fun to see a Nintendo game done this well on a competing platform. And this version of Space Invaders is pretty decent as well. And it even has its own little twist on the classic gameplay, as the invaders start off by coming out the side of the ship at the left hand side, and with each progressive wave it will start from slightly closer to the ground, though it does seem to be missing the classic shields near the bottom of the screen. Though unfortunately loading off cassettes still seems to be a bit of a problem. It will start to load the game, but then either give me an error message or just continue loading forever and not actually doing anything. It seems when it came to the XL line, the 800 was the far more popular machine, and actually it was the most popular machine of the entire 8-bit line itself, and so most games were actually targeting that machine with its full 64K of RAM. All in all, I'm really quite happy with how this machine turned out. It wasn't the most dirtiest or the most broken, but it has scrubbed up really nicely. Though I have to admit the power supply did start to give me a bit of grief, though thankfully you can buy a modern, smaller power supply online very easily, and that pretty much solved all my problems. Though there is still a lack of decent available software due to the low amount of RAM, so I might have to look into that in another episode. So until next time, I've been the Goldfish. Here is a pretty nice looking machine, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up or subscribe, as I tend to put out 3 videos a month covering hardware, software, as well as game development. and you can check out 2 other videos of mine by seeing the links on the screen.